The book really talks about two major accomplishments that these women made collectively. And one, of course, the obvious first one was breaking through the glass ceiling. You talked a little bit already about, what that was like, or what it was like at that time when you went to Cambodia. But, in the preface, you wrote that in Cambodia, you were covering the central story of the war. And you said, whereas in the US, I would have been lucky to write for the local women's page. And I had to stop at that and sort of calculate and realize that when you were on that plane to Cambodia, I was working for the local women's page. No longer called that, it was called Today's Living, but we ran lots of recipes and fashion photos. And, the idea, even in 1973, in the newsroom where I worked, that a woman would cover something like City Hall was almost as big a fantasy as a woman could go to Cambodia and become a war correspondent. So just wanted to say thank you also to you, because the glass ceilings were still very much in place when you went. But really, what's so important about this book, I think, is describing what these women did after they broke through the glass ceilings. And I think you've got some more examples that can help us understand with each of these women, what is it that they brought to the story that was different?
Well, to go back to Frankie, just what I just described, that she refused to be solely what they called bang bang, but to cover the war as battle. And I'll read from The Tragedy of Saigon. That was the last thing I mentioned, rather than read from her book, which was later. Remember, she's in her mid-20s, and she is coming up with these amazing way to look at war. One of her colleagues said she put foreign and foreign correspondent. She had such a different take on it. She writes, behind the alleyways and the facades of new homes in Saigon, there's a maze of thatch huts and tin roof shacks called bui pat. Here and there, amid the chaos of shacks and alleyways, new concrete buildings rear up in a splendor of pastel face walls, neon lights, and plastic garden furniture. Bui Pat is the new face of Vietnam. From Da Nang in the north to Rakiga, the slow port base at the base of Delta, the new slums, these crust villages, spread all over the cities and garrison homes, everywhere that the refugees can find a piece of land sheltered from the war. In the past year of the American buildups, 500,000 people have left their villages to be counted as refugees, and there was no money for them. No other, I could not find any example resembling that. And that's why I write so much about what the others were writing. Now, Kate, I have to see if I can do this. Yes, here we are, if you don't mind. Life and death of a copter crew, Tain in Vietnam. There are times when the Vietnam War makes a reporter's fingers shake while holding a pencil. My pencil wobbles as I write the story of two young helicopter gunners I knew briefly as Smitty and Mac. I saw them go to war many times. Now I have seen their bodies come back, and that is why this is a hard story for me to tell. It is a story of Smitty, Special Forces Roger Smith of South Point, Ohio, red-haired fellow with a slow grin, and Mac, Mike McCaffrey of Lynn, Massachusetts. It is also a story of the 900 helicopter crews shot down in this war over the jungles and rice paddies. I had intended to write about the thousands of crews, young men like Smitty and Mac, who fly helicopters. But except for Smitty and Mac, the story no doubt would not have contained that impersonal language of the Army War Report, words saying crashed and burned, all 4 crew members killed in action. Smitty and Mac laughed when they found I was trying to write a story about their lives, but then they laughed about everything. No, I couldn't find any example of a man even close to that. I don't want to say it's gender per se, but as outsiders, they found they were much more interested in the humanity of the story. And they both dug deep into what was then called the locals, i.e. the country where the war is being fought. And again, there are a couple of New Yorkers, Jonathan, there was a couple, but also because Frankie was the only long form magazine writer. I mean, she went to Vietnam and she made long form her thing. And to show you just how the difference, she didn't have a cable card. Every single article she mailed from the Saigon post office. So they added, it's now taken for granted you want to know the country you're writing about. Whereas you will see in the reporting then, it was, what are the Americans doing? What is the policy? So the war is not narrowly defined by the battles. It is the country you're going to, the culture you're changing, and the way it's going to change your country. So that's why Fire in the Lake, Vietnamese and Americans in Vietnam, even the subtitle tells it.
Great. This was the point where I was going to say you can put questions in chat or Q&A, but I see people are already doing that. And I will get to those. We'll try to get to everybody's questions, but I have a couple more things I want to ask about. One is, you know, the men who were reporting from there were reporting, you know, in maybe a different way than what you've just described, but also coming under, you know, pressures as well. Mm-hmm. They were called anti-war. David Halberstam, Neil Sheehan, Peter Arnett, Malcolm Brown. I can't remember which one of them said this, but years later, one of them said, you know, we were always accused of being anti-war, but we were not. When we went there, we did not actually question the fundamental premise of going to war. What we were doing was going to the battlefield, seeing what was going on, then hearing what, you know, the military was saying at the 5 o'clock follies and reporting that, you know, they're lying. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of basic accountability journalism, but it still, you know, got them labeled as anti-war, nasty calls from the White House, you know, get rid of that guy, move him somewhere. And I wondered, you know, the women had all kinds of their own pressures, but was that one that they experienced? Were they, you know, denounced as anti-war, and were they anti-war, do you think?
Oh, no, they were, yes, they were denounced. Frances Fitzgerald, because she questioned the very basis, unlike Halberstam, Sheehan, and Brown, she questioned the very basis, and she went out of her way to make sure people were, she's not anti-war. She questioned the domino theory. She questioned if Americans knew what they were doing in Vietnam. And I have to, and Kate went out of her way to make sure that she was not, her loyalties, one side or the other. She was very sympathetic to what was going on, but she did. And I have to say, one of the best examples, which doesn't include these three women, but 1973, Silvana Foa uncovered how the United States was illegally helping in the bombing of Cambodia. She wrote a big piece for UPI, and she was thrown out of the country, very much with the help of the American Embassy. A week or so later, Sidney Schamberg of the New York Times wrote the same story, and he got nothing but praise. And you were much more vulnerable as a woman. I didn't go into the sexual aspect. I think you can read about that in your book. I mean, the men love to gossip about the women's romantic life, but rarely acknowledge their accomplishments. So it was a different, Halberstam, Brown, and Sheehan were in the early 60s during the Kennedy period. All of us came later. The three women came during the Johnson period.